This is Identity at the Center. If it has anything to do with IAM, this is the go-to podcast. Now your hosts, Jim McDonald and Jeff Steadman.
Welcome to the Identity at the Center podcast. I'm Jeff, and that's Jim. Hey, Jim.
Hey, Jeff. How are you?
I'm operating. Actually, I usually say not so bad, but I'm operating at like a 60% clip right now because I've been sick all week and my voice just sucks.
How'd you like me getting you sick last week?
Yeah, I appreciate that. It was either you or my wife. So you and I traveled all last week for client work, our real jobs, and you were sick, coughing all over the place. I'm like, stay away from me. And while we were out there, my wife was sick at home. So by the time I got home Saturday, I think by Sunday night, Monday, I was like, all right, one of you bastards gave me something. So
yeah. Well, I feel kind of responsible, but then I also think that, you interacted with about 1,000 people in the course of that week also. So it could have been any one of them. But anyway, usually I'm the one who's sick and grinding through it. You don't get sick very often.
No. I've dodged a lot of bullets.
It's good to see. But
you and I were texting. I was like, I feel like the last couple of months with all the travel I've been doing, 102 flights last year. So a lot in the third quarter or fourth quarter, especially. I was like Neo in the Matrix, dodging like virus and plague bullets coming my way. And I have not been sick in a very long time. And then here it goes. It happens. Fortunately, I feel like I'm getting better already, but yeah, my voice sucks. So there may be parts where I like point to you and say, hey, you take the next question. I can't talk.
Do your best, Yoda. But yeah, I was, I've had my years where I've done a lot of flights. 102 is a lot of flights. But doesn't it seem like every time now there's a delay? Like on this last trip, I was delayed in both directions.
Yeah. I was too. We got delayed, or we actually got stuck in Atlanta overnight. We had to stay in Atlanta and then fly out the following morning, getting where we're going. And then you got delayed coming home. I got delayed coming home the following day. And then I was actually supposed to have 2 flights this week. And I missed the first flight was delayed, and I wasn't going to make my connection, and I wasn't going to be able to get to where I needed to go in time. So I was like, I would just cancel that, which actually worked out well because I was sick anyway at that point. So I was like, I'm not going to go. It's not worth it. Yeah. And then at that point, it was just kind of like, we'll just stay home this week and get free and clear. Don't be that guy who gets on the plane and is like, all over the place.
Do something. Mm-hmm. Go somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
So we were focused a lot on privileged access management last week. And then the announcement came out that Delinea acquired Authamize. Mm-hmm. I thought that was really interesting. I always thought pretty highly of those guys. And, Gal was on the podcast in our early days, right? Before we had good audio quality or any of that good stuff at, episode 98 all the way back in June of 2021. And by the way, you know how I found that? I went to idacpodcast.com. I clicked listen to the show. We've got a handy dandy search bar that you put out there. And I'm telling you, that search bar is like, it's better than most search bars that are out there. Like it really works, actually.
I spent literally minutes putting that together. So I'm glad you appreciate the handiwork of a simple search. But yeah, you're a natural promoter. You promoting the website already. This is great.
Yeah. Well, and in addition to that, on the website, we've got the leave us a voicemail button. And so as a special promotion for the leave us a voicemail, we're doing a little, let's call it a contest. I don't know that it's really a contest, but if you leave us a voicemail and it's a question that we can use on an upcoming episode on February 5th, we're going to pick 5 questions, run them. You and I are going to answer them. That's going to be the episode, right? And we are going to have links that people will get a free ebook copy of Learning Digital Identity by Phil Windley. And we had him on a recent episode. Great interview, awesome book. So if you're interested, you want a copy of the book, or you just want to play a role and hear your voice on the podcast, go out to idacpodcast.com, click listen to, leave a voicemail, or what is it? Is it that, or
talk
is
to
it
us.
Contact us or something?
Yeah, it's like you go to the homepage and there's a little flyer on the right-hand side that pops up, says talk to us. And then, you just record. You can do that. And thanks to, I think it was Tim, maybe, who spotted that the mobile website was broken. So I fixed that and we got his. So that's good. So you can go to the mobile website or the regular website. You'll see a little banner that says talk to us. You can also go to the contact page. It's there too. Send us a voicemail. Comes to Jim and I. And we'll use the best ones. We'll pick 5 of them and get yourself a free ebook. It's the first time we've done a contest giveaway. It's kind of exciting for us.
Yeah. And I would say that, look, even if it's not one of the 5 be doing that episode, I think if we get some extra questions, we'll incorporate them into future episodes.
Mm-hmm. You're responsible for, by the way, for contacting winners and getting stuff out there. I'm putting that on you.
Oh, well, that's my reward.
That is your reward. What else? Anything else going on, or should we get to our main?
Let's get to it,
content?
man. I mean, like, this is an episode I've been looking forward to for a long time. We met these guys all the way back at Identiverse last year, and it's kind of finally come full circle. So let's get into it.
Yeah, and we got like a little bit of an alphabet soup. I'm not even sure what I'm going to call this episode yet. Maybe it'll name itself as we're going along, or maybe if any of us come up with a good name for how I should call this, I'm looking for ideas. We're going to talk about CAEP, ITDR, SSF. We've got Atul from Signal. He's a CTO. Atul Tulshibagwale. I knew I would screw it up. I'm so sorry, Atul Tulshibagwale, CTO of Signal and co-chair of the Shared Signals Working Group and corporate board member at the OpenID Foundation. Welcome, Atul.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
I was practicing before the show hit. I was like, all right, let me try and get this in my head and we get it right. And then immediately I goofed it up. I'm going to blame it on the sickness. We've also got a bonus guest as well. This is a 2-for-1 today. We've got Sean Odell. He's a senior staff security engineer, consumer and workforce identity and access management at Disney, small little company that people might have heard of. Welcome to the show, Sean.
Thank you both for having me. Pleasure to be here.
So as with some of our guests, sometimes we need to make sure that opinions that are expressed are their own. I'm going to make sure I read this out so that people understand viewpoints here. This podcast appearance by
Sean Odell
is for informational purposes only. The content should be regarded as general information and serve as a springboard for your own independent investigations. All perspectives expressed by
Sean Odell
hereafter are his own. All right. Now we're free and clear. We can talk about anything we want. Why don't we start with you, Atul? Tell us a little bit about your identity origin story. We're going to get to Sean as well, but how about you go first? How did you get into the world of identity? Is it something that you chose or did it choose you?
It's actually an interesting story that I was working on supercomputing and I was in India back then, and I was working on the first supercomputer that India developed. And the day we got the first order for that supercomputer, USA kind of brought down the export controls. So we were in the free market after that. And, I was suddenly feeling the pressure of, commercial pressure from American competitors. So I was wondering what to do next. And I was like, okay, there's this thing called the internet, and, you're never going to be sure who's on the other end of that internet. And that's how I got into public key cryptography. It was something that I had read about. And I found a job in Pune in India. That was a startup that was doing cryptography based stuff. And so I thought, hey, that's a good place to be. Well, I go there and it turns out that I built all the software and the toolkit, the cryptographic toolkit that I was supposed to be using, they couldn't export that to India. So that's how, I ended up in the US after they got some kind of a clearance from the Department of Commerce to have me work on that toolkit over here. And when I was here in Atlanta, I was sort of introduced to this company called VeriSign, which was a very tiny company at that time. And I was sort of really, it just caught my imagination, like all the different possibilities with the, public key cryptography and, the public certificate authority and all that. That's how I got into identity. Is I joined VeriSign as the 13th engineer there. So.
And you also do some work with the Shared Signals Working Group with the OpenID Foundation. I kind of mentioned that when I introduced you. Tell us about the Shared Signals Working Group. What is it? And what would you say you do around there?
So the Shared Signals Working Group is the part of the OpenID Foundation. Like, people know the OpenID Foundation mainly through the OpenID Connect protocol, which is the single sign-on protocol. the shared signals working group you can think of as a generalized framework for asynchronous communication, right? And so you can think of, something like a webhook, like an API webhook where, you call an API and I say, oh, well, tell me about this when something changes or something like that. And that's what the shared signals framework is. What goes into those asynchronous communications are events. They're in the form of, security event tokens or CTs, and CAEP and risk are two applications that sit on top of the shared signals framework. And so the development of these standards, the shared signals framework, the CAEP events and the risk events all together is the work of the shared signals working group. And so we've just recently released the second implementers draft of the shared signals framework, which is a pretty big effort. And onward and forward. And, and because we're talking about the shared signals framework, maybe I should make a little announcement here for our co-speaker. Are you ready, Sean?
Let's hear it.
So as of Tuesday, you'll be sharing my burden of being a co-chair. So, I'm happy to announce that here. So congratulations.
Happy to take on the workload and the honor. Appreciate it.
You put some applause on that one.
I got sound effects for everything. Well, that's great. That's exciting. Sean, we're going to get to you in a second. I want to ask again about Atul, your background. I mentioned also you're the CTO of Signal, and that's SGNL.ai. For people who aren't familiar with Signal, what is Signal's purpose in life? Like, what are the problems that you're looking to solve?
Right. So I think, the immediate problem that we're trying to solve is the ability to manage authorization at enterprise scale, right? So we think that the access management or access control problem is being solved largely at the developer level and in some cases, and through more static systems that don't really scale to the speed and the automation that is required in today's enterprises. And so what we do is basically we work on the principle that you should not have to manually decide permissions for anyone really at any point of time. And so that, naturally leads to what we call as, zero standing access. And then you want to manage your access policies at scale. So you need to have a very, human readable policies that you can organize in reusable snippets and, have very good controls around how to manage them and all that. And then you need to be able to enforce that access at various levels, your infrastructure like AWS and Azure, or, even Linux and SSH, and all the way up to like your APIs and, various API gateways or internal applications and stuff like that. And then all this needs to be, audited in real time and, be able to, enforce these decisions in real time. So in a nutshell, that's kind of what Signal does.
Well, we'll have a link in our show notes so people can check out, kind of learn more about it. Sean, let's turn over to you. Identity origin stories. Tell us how you got into the wonderful world of identity.
I'll give you a part 1 and a part 1.1. So the first time came around, so working for a logistics company doing like LTL and truckload freight and even small package shipping, and had to hand build a CRM from scratch. But I had to figure out using the lovely principal identity from Microsoft, doing it in like .NET 1.1 before it was actually like a thing. So I had to figure out authentication, authorization, and access before it was really a thing. Built out a homegrown authorization engine, built out a homegrown access engine, migrated it out of SQL and put it into its own standing thing. Then they got acquired and I went and worked for a medical company. So that was my first foray into it, and it looked kind of interesting, and it was a very good domain. I was much more intrigued with authorization than authentication. That was pretty easy. So, and here's the part 1.1 to it. I had to take over a thing which is surprisingly still well known, called BitQ, Keystone. I had to learn that from scratch, and it was a beast. So my origin story is like two parts to it. First, it was the dabble, and it shows me for sure. And then I dived in deeper and won't look back. It's so much fun. Every day is something different.
It's like a horse head left in your bed. You try to get out and you just can't. You work with Disney now. I guess tell us a little bit about your role with Disney and sort of maybe just kind of briefly, what does a engineer do from a IAM perspective?
I work with the entire company on workforce and consumer identity, everything from pushing standards to be adopted, doing it the right way with standards, helping build out implementations, roll out services, own services, run security services, insert IAM bingo buzzword here, across the gamut. We do privilege access, all of it. So my scale is the company and my scope is IAM, and it's honestly so much fun. I enjoy it every day. It's, again, identity never sleeps. Stole that quote from Gordon Gekko from Wall Street, for sure. But instead
if
of money,
one to steal, that's the one to steal.
Exactly, right? It's a mixture of like, you're an engineer, you're an architect, and you're a consultant all in one. And your scope it's so much fun.
And you were at Identiverse last year, and you gave a presentation there. Can you tell us a little about that? And are you going to be at Identiverse again this year? And if so, you have anything planned to talk about there?
Did a couple submissions and a panel, being on, participating in the working group, and now being, officially responsible for shepherding that along. I did submit 2 submissions. One was for zero outstanding privilege. The other one is for, I don't want to give it away, but it's an interesting title, but it involves shared signals in CAEP and what powers it. Because, we'll talk about it more on this podcast. And the other one is a panel with all of the co-chairs on the shared signals working group.
It sounds really cool. So, Sean, before we hit record, you had come up with an analogy, and I think we should use it because, these terms, shared signals and CAEP, most people are not familiar with it. Why don't you throw your analogy out there, and we'll see. We'll throw it against the wall, see if anyone salutes.
Well, this is going to show my age, so that's okay. The analogy with what CAEP and shared signals goes back, like, let's say way back. So you can look at it from if a law enforcement agency were ever to issue an all points bulletin, that would be essentially a CAEP event. Like, this is a person of interest. This is the person to watch out for. If you see this person, they're going to be dangerous. Don't engage with them. That's the event. But the shared signals framework is when you have law agency in Denver sending a fax, here's the age, to someone in Atlanta or a counterpart over in Colorado or in LA. The transmission of the fax is essentially the protocol to send the CAEP event. That is what shared signals is. Another way to look at it is you had a wanted flyer. I know that I'm in search of something or a wanted flyer. I'm walking around and putting wanted flyers out over telephone poles and whatnot. Again, the event is the flyer. The transmission is me walking it around one by one. So it's kind of like a good analogy to start sticking into, like, what is CAEP, what's shared signals, and how does it transpose from real world to digital? With one minor nuance, there's a lot of the difference in the digital world versus the real world. Real world, this person's like a person of interest or like a malicious actor, whereas in the digital world, it's a signal. Like, we think it is, like, this IP looks suspicious, or this behavioral event that Bob did looks bad, or what Atul did.
So you're profiling. Let's be honest. You're profiling these folks, these poor folks.
And we're only profiling because the P in CAEP stands for that.
Okay. Well,
So
no,
we'll go
I
with
mean,
that.
yeah, it makes a lot of sense, right? You have the central agency, which is like your central IT capability, and it's sending it to the individual departments, which are like your applications, right? So that's the message that you're sending is, watch out for this person of interest.
Correct.
Because they're throwing off these they're fitting this profile of like, oh, they're hitting it with a headless browser, or they've tried to authenticate unsuccessfully 50 times, et cetera, et cetera.
So I just wanted to add to what Sean just said, right? So it's not necessary that, each event could be anything suspicious in itself, right? Like, it could just be an innocuous kind of observation, like, hey, I saw this user come to this application, and that by itself doesn't mean anything. But then if you see the same user within like a span of a few seconds visit like, 5 or 10 different applications, then, that could be a lateral movement attack, and, you want to respond to that, right? So an event by itself doesn't necessarily mean anything's wrong. It just means that you've observed something that could be of interest to others.
And I'm going to add perfect. I'm going to add one more thing. And Jim, I think the way you said it is not every signal is bad. The whole point of the shared signals framework is the beginning word of it. It's share. Because, to get to zero trust, we all have to share. It's taught same language, right? So if I present a leading indicator that you, Jim, your system sees, my leading indicator with what you're seeing could lead to an aggregate signal that you have collectively to say, oh, Sean sent me this, Jim has this. Both of them together to you could say an informational signal from me and a medium one from you could equal a high, which means you, Jim, as your system could take action on it. You don't have to, but you could.
Yeah, I see a ton of value in this. It is kind of complex, so I want to try to bring it back to building blocks, especially for people who might not have all the context. So a tool, if you could kind of help us define and understand. So it's CAEP is Continuous Access Evaluation Profile. That's the profiling bit that we were joking about a little bit earlier, CAEP. The funny thing is, like, if you go onto Google and Google CAEP identity, by the way, CAEP also stands for other things, but within our space, within this identity space, it's like a tool. You're listed over and over again, man. So we're hearing from the expert. What is this? What is CAEP?
Yeah. So it started as, and that's maybe some of the confusion, that it started as Continuous Access Evaluation Protocol. And it was, based on a little blog that I wrote when I was in Google back, I guess, 5 years ago now. And then what happened was we started meeting informally as a cross-industry group. There were about, 30 odd companies from around the world that were meeting outside, any standard body at that point. And then we realized that, hey, we although the objective that we are trying to achieve, which is session security, is different, we are sharing the mechanism of asynchronous publishing and subscribing with this other thing called risk. And so the two merged, and that's how the shared signals framework came about. And then CAEP became, Continuous Access Evaluation Profile of that shared signals framework, right? So just to clear up that little confusion there, right? So what CAEP is really all about is being able to improve your session security by sharing signals that are relevant to your user session, right? Because in today's world, you're always signed into a large number of services. You're using a large number of services simultaneously. And B, there are many independent services that are actually being able to tell information about about your posture, about your security, about, something about your ability to have that session, right? And like, for instance, while I'm using my computer, there may be an endpoint security program that is on my computer that is detecting something about my computer. If they detect something, then they need to be able to tell someone else that, hey, this person is on this computer and I'm detecting some malware on it. And so, you should sort of take care of that situation. Or a service provider that you're working, like, let's say, using Google Drive or some file sharing service, and they detect that all of a sudden the same user who was previously in, Cupertino, California, suddenly is in Taiwan or something like that, right? So, you should be able to share this information about what you're seeing in order to build a more complete security picture, and then in real time be able to affect, what that user's experience is in terms of using those services that they're using.
Yeah, I love that example that you just brought up, which I often hear referred to as impossible travel, right? You can't go from Cupertino to New York City in 15 minutes. Or 15 seconds in some cases, right?
Yeah.
So, just in thinking about that, I usually hear that associated with conditional access or adaptive authentication. Am I on the right track? But there's more to it, right?
Yeah, I think Ultimately, I think there's recognition that this is a problem that a lot of different companies have attempted to solve. And the difference with CAEP and everything else is basically CAEP is a standardized way of doing things, right? So you may set rules of conditional access in, let's say, your Azure or other systems where you can say, oh, if this user is coming from this IP address, and allow them, or if not, don't allow them. But that's kind of specific to one particular system. Whereas what CAEP is trying to do is expand that across different vendors, across different services. And why that is important is because every enterprise, without exception, is going to have a multitude of vendors, right? And you really cannot control what kind of technologies are at play. So you need to establish some kind of a baseline that everybody can communicate with, so that, you improve the overall security for all users, right?
Yeah, that's a really good explanation. And, you mentioned the blog article. We're going to throw a link to that in the show notes. The other thing, Sean, that this is sounding a lot like, so when I hear Atul talk about CAEP, it reminds me a lot of what an ITDR can do. So what are the similarities and differences between CAEP and an ITDR? Or am I missing the plane here?
I think there's an element of CAEP and ITDR. So the way I broke it down is the ITD is the CAEP. The ITD is like, how to explain this? The ITD is how you figure out how do you assemble a CAEP event, right? But the R is the response, and the response is using the shared signals framework with a CAEP event. So it's very tangential to it, and it should be pivotal in any ITDR strategy, because it is, like Atul said, you can use this. If vendors have tried to solve this independently, right? But if you have them all speaking shared signals using CAEP events, then you get true vendor interop, which then you lower your security threshold of having to have a privileged API into Azure, or a privileged API into your IDP or into your PAM system. So if vendors all support shared signals using like CAEP events, for example, your identity threat detection, you can focus harder on that. And then your response is emit signal to A, emit signal to B, emit signal to C. So the where I think companies should focus more on is their business and what looks suspicious, than worrying about, I have to call 15 systems API independently, and I have to worry about when they change their APIs. Versus if you just accept this standard, everyone wins.
I really like that explanation, how you said, okay, the CAEP and the shared signals framework is essentially the ITD, and then not the R. Atul,
actually,
where do you come from on this?
The R.
Go ahead.
No. The R is the response, and the response is the signal. So the response is the shared signal. The ITD is the brain behind it. So the response is the shared signal with the CAEP event. So if I misspoke, sorry, Jim.
Okay, no, that's great. Atul, it looks like you're ready to jump in and add something.
Yeah, I just wanted to mention that, threat detection is a multi-homed kind of, exercise, right? Because you cannot detect a threat by just observing someone in one little corner of, all the multiple systems that you're having, right? If those systems can communicate with each other, you even improve your threat detection, right? So it's not just the response, it also helps in the threat detection itself.
That's right. I mean, yeah, I think that's one of the things that we talk about with our clients, and we talk a lot about on the podcast is, if you get overwhelmed with the number of events or things that look suspicious, then the things that actually are a problem just kind of hide in that. You have to be able to separate the wheat and the chaff, as they say.
And Jim, I want to add on to what Atul said. It's a good follow on, where it's almost like the response of multiple systems helps with your threat detection. So it's almost like sharing is caring. That was part of my Identiverse talk last year, is sharing is caring, because if you have 15 systems all doing this and they all share the same information, you get better threat detection because you get better responses. So
just thinking of Identiverse, just a little plug out there for people who are thinking about going. It's going to be in May this year, and it's an awesome conference. So Jeff and I are planning on being back there. Sean, I mean, one of the really cool things about having you on the podcast is you're an actual practitioner putting these things to work. Give us a little, maybe not like really what you're doing it on, but an example of like real life. How do you put something like this into motion? And then I also think like if somebody's starting from the base level, this is like they don't have CAEP or shared signals, but they're really intrigued by this concept. Where do they get started? So first, some kind of like real world examples, and then maybe some real world guidance of like how you go from not using this to using it.
Well, it's actually a good plug for there. So part of what Atul has asked that I help shepherd along is contributing use cases in the working group so that it addresses the exact question you have is where do I start? Because you have to always start with the business case first and why it's needed and what the use cases are and build backwards. Because you can build a shared signal system with CAEP. Awesome. What's the adoption look like? So it's you have to start business case first. Like what do you want to go after? Because you can very easily get into a signal to noise ratio problem very quickly. And by signal to noise meaning I'm going to pepper you with 10,000 events and you're going to not know which one do you act on. So Jim, I think you asked like what's a real world example. I'm going to give this to you, and this is a pretty wide known problem. It's more of an annoyance. Everyone subscribes to some streaming platform. Pick them across the board. And this is not a plug for Disney Plus, so please do not think that. Sometimes you get logged out of your TV. And I don't know about everybody else, but like I hate putting my password into Roku or Name System X. It is so bothersome and annoying. What this could help do is help enhance the user experience through security. So let's give a prime example. Let's say we talk about your favorite example, Jim, the Superman case. I can't be in Cupertino in Atlanta in the same 15 seconds. If I'm on my streaming subscription and all of a sudden I see like a device came from Atlanta, but I usually watch stuff in California using CAEP and shared signals powered by some detection engine that has to happen so that you can't just implement shared signals and watch it happen. There has to be some kind of threat detection or behavioral analysis that says, I only watch this show or I only watch this platform from California. You're coming from Atlanta. That looks weird. So using the shared signals framework, you would emit a session revoke CAEP event for that device, not for your entire account. So you can still be at home in California streaming your favorite shows, and you're not burdened because someone got your password on Have I Been Pwned or take your pick site X, right? So the applicability there is very real. It's being prescriptive in security and being very consumer friendly to not to disturb someone's user experience. So it's very good to harp on that. Through security, you get better user experience as one exact case, but that's one of many that you come up with. But that's a very one that should hit home with most people.
Let me throw a twist in there because I think it's a compelling use case. Let me flip it on its head though. I travel a lot. I'm constantly logging into things all over the US for the most part. Is there a way that something like CAEP or this shared signals framework can help me? Maybe is picked up that I did log on to one system already, and it's not going to throw me another alert on another system that I tried to log in or an application. Is there a way to help my scenario with something like this?
If you travel a lot, and it's consistent because you go to different places, you have to make a lot of assumptions, but whatever's powering your shared signals implementation using CAEP, that is your behavioral analysis that we know Jeff travels to apparently 102 flights a year. So that's a lot, right? So if you travel a lot, maybe the geolocation where you're at is not an indicator for your given account, but maybe it's like, okay, we move your geographical boundary from state to country, right? But if we see something coming from like UK, Colombia, Switzerland, that's suspect. Or other thing is, even if you travel, you tend to use the same device, right? So if you're an iOS person or an Android person, let's just say you're an iOS person, and all of a sudden I see Samsung or high tech or whatever. Now, then we can move the behavioral analysis from some fact to some other dimension. So you don't go just based off a location. You go based off device, even time of day. You could. But in your example, I would say the device is the next leading indicator. And again, that's why it's important that we could send signals that looks like, Jeff's in Arizona, Louisiana, Maine, wherever you are. Not a bad thing. But if all of a sudden we see you in Montana when we know you don't go there, could be. And you could have some friction, but that's kind of where you have to have, this is not a CAEP or an SSF spec, but you have to have that feedback loop from your guests or from your users to say, no, this is really me. This is really me. That way you know that it's really you and that your behavioral signal that you're powering to enable signals in CAEP happen, your data analysis has to be accurate and has to always be given that feedback model. Great question.
Yeah.
Or great twist, I should say.
I think the device thing was what I was thinking of. Atul, what do you want to add in?
I can add a couple of enterprise cases because one very early adopter of CAEP, although they predate the standard and so they have adopted it in their own sort of way, is Microsoft. And how they've done it is that, previously they used to use short-lived tokens between, Microsoft Azure AD and, Exchange and Teams. And what those short-lived tokens meant that the user had to re-log in every hour or so in order to prove that they still are sort of the same user, right? Now, what happened is after they started using CAEP, they were able to extend the token lifetime to a much longer time so that if something was wrong with that user, they could just send a CAEP message between Azure AD and Exchange or Azure AD and Teams in order to say that this user should be logged out, right? For example. And that sort of was a grand, it was something that they've actually said that, it's one of the 4 pillars of their, reliability strategy, right? And so it's a huge thing for, the top services of Microsoft to be using something like CAEP. It's not the standard by itself, but it's something very similar, right? And they even call it continuous access evaluation. And they acknowledge that it's sort of leveraging the concepts in the standard. The other use case I was going to talk about was the Apple use case. They recently announced in the WWDC that they require custom IDPs to support shared signals in order to be able to integrate with Apple Business Manager. Now, Apple Business Manager is like this device management thing where if you get a Mac from your employer, you can manage it using Apple Business Manager, and then you can have certain restrictions about its use and things like that. Now, let's say you're using your Mac or your iPhone, and your IDP says, well, this person has changed their password, and you need to enter your changed password on your device. They're going to send a CAEP message, which is a credential change message to Apple. And then Apple is going to lock you out of your device until you re-enter your password, right? For example. So those are some of the sort of publicly known, enterprise use cases. I'm sure there are more, and I'm sure Sean knows of a lot more, but, those are the ones that we can talk about here.
And Atul, I want to hit on something that Jim said earlier, like what's the difference between conditional access and adaptive authentication? The irony here is getting a thing in your business, in the workforce like CAEP, gives you that, because you could give your workforce user a longer session with bigger trust if you have a thing like CAEP in place. And it's very shared signals, and CAEP brings together a lot of IAM domains. It really does, like authentication, access, authorization. It brings it all together, and I don't want to say it's core to a strategy, but it can power a lot of what like a product team would want to do in the IAM space from a workforce perspective. There's a lot of workforce stuff to talk about too still. So
here's an update that I would like to see. I don't want to have to keep logging into my Blizzard account, play World of Warcraft every time my network changes. I mean, that's where I'm looking for CAEP to benefit me, or shared signals framework or something. It's like, dude, it's the same laptop. Yes, you're logging in again. Why are you prompting me again? Like, I feel like, I think we've been doing this podcast like 4.5 years. And I think very early on, I kind of pointed to the gaming industry as one of the early adopters of just MFA at large because of account takeovers and things like that, and how valuable, some of those things, those digital things were. And I was like, oh yeah, like Blizzard is great. Like they send you a push notification and you click a button and you're in. And now it's like super annoying. It's like, all I did was go from one network to another network. It's still the same device. Like, what's the problem here, right? Shouldn't we have a better way to do that? I got to do my dailies, man. Come on. This has been an interesting discussion. I'll be honest. I don't know quite sure if I get it yet. We might have to do a follow-up conversation. It's okay. Is this what you mean? I feel like I'm a little bit into that first month of like high school chemistry, and you're like, what just happened? And then all of a sudden it's going to start to click. But I think I'm starting to get it. Let me try to wrap things up here. And actually, Sean, I'll ask you, and I just want to have as simple of a definition as you possibly can make it. Pretend I'm an idiot. You don't have to pretend, but for the podcast, just pretend.
It's not true.
What is CAEP?
CAEP in its current state is a way you can manage user/identity sessions. And the shared signals framework is the way in which you communicate that message to systems.
Okay, that's very helpful. I appreciate that. My simple brain was starting to explode, and I need to save some room to talk about, a couple things. The first thing is I have the most interesting like office kind of background just because I have a nice camera and monitor and trees and lights and stuff like that behind me. But Sean, you gotta explain to people what Atul, Jim, and I have been looking past you at for like the last 45 minutes or so. Explain your office to people.
Well, I'm a new father. I used to have a bigger office downstairs that had life-size Star Wars Stormtrooper bust from episodes 2, 3, and 4. So clone troopers to Stormtroopers. But I got moved upstairs because he now runs the first floor, and I have been reclused up here. So what you can't see in the background is I have a problem. I collect hot toys and sideshow collectibles. I'm a collector, and I have 37 hilts and 22 helmets and 8 full-size busts from Star Wars. And they range from Commander Gree to all the Stormtroopers. I have so many helmets, and I have probably, I don't even know how many, but I have a very forgiving wife. It's just be collecting like more stuff, but I have a lot of cool things. I have a rose gold saber from General Leia as well. I have too much to talk about, but it's limited. I don't go for like the Black Series stuff. I want like the collector stuff. Yeah. And it's all behind UV glass, and yeah.
What's the most, I guess, the rarest item that you've got in your collection?
The rarest thing I have is a mint inbox 1977 Millennium Falcon.
Oh, wow. Dude, when I was a kid, that was what I wanted so badly, and I never got one.
I have two of them. One that I played with and one that is like not open.
Ugh, that is so cool. Let's keep with the sort of the Disney theme here in honor of Sean and the small company that he works for. This is a question for everybody. Atul, we'll start with you. What's your favorite Star Wars, Marvel, or Indiana Jones movie or TV show?
Yeah, I think there's so many good ones, but I got to go with Rogue One, which was a recent movie from the Star Wars series. And, it's so good. It was so good. I did not expect it because, ever since sort of the merger between Disney and Star Wars happened, I was like, where is all this going? But Rogue One just completely, astonished me. And I just loved everything about it.
That's a good movie. It's funny. I don't want to spoil it, but I feel like it's kind of like, it's kind of out there because it's already, really it's kind of what happens to get the Death Star plans, right? That's sort of like the thing. And in the fourth episode, I guess, depending on how you watch the original, arc of the movies, everyone dies at the end. So it's kind of like it ends on kind of a downer, but it's such a good movie. I'm with you. And I gotta be honest, I love what Disney has done with the Star Wars franchise. They've put out so many good things. I'm sure there's caretaking going on to make sure that the brand doesn't get, screwed up. But between Mandalorian You got Baby Yoda. I mean, you've got. I liked Obi-Wan. I thought it was great. I liked the Boba Fett stories. You've got. I haven't seen Osaka yet, or yeah. No, what is it? What's her name? The Jedi? Ahsoka. Sorry.
Ahsoka.
I'm like, Ahsoka's not right. That's a place. Ahsoka. I haven't seen that one yet, but I've heard good things about it. So I feel like there's a lot of good choices out there. Sean, what's your favorite Marvel, Indiana Jones, or Star Wars movie or show?
Well, Atul took my answer. So probably shouldn't say Rogue One again because we just heard that. Because I talked about Star Wars the entire time, I'll go Marvel. And it's traditional Iron Man. Iron Man 1 set the foundation for the MCU. It was an epic movie that if you haven't watched the special on it, see how it was filmed on like a shoestring budget. Favreau made that film. Like he set the stage for the MCU.
Is that behind the scenes? Is that something that they can see on Disney? Because I haven't seen that. I want to see that.
Yeah, it's on. I think it's on Disney Plus. Yeah, you can.
Okay.
Nice.
It's shameless plug, but
no. Hey, I mean, I have Disney. A lot of people have Disney. Says they don't need our help selling subscriptions. That's the one thing. If Identity at the Center makes a drop in the Disney numbers, hey, we'll be happy to have them sponsor us. Jim, what's your favorite Star Wars, Marvel, or Indiana Jones movie?
Actually, I was going to surprise you by picking a show because I saw The Mandalorian a while ago and I really enjoyed it. But I've got to go with old school Return of the Jedi. I enjoyed that, man. And I think that was, it's funny. You look back at some of those movies now and you're just like, oh my God, these graphics suck. But you got to remember the time frame when they were created.
Yeah.
And I mean, at the time they just completely blew me away.
I mean, it was such a shift, right? It was like at that point when those movies came out, the original was like everybody wanted a lightsaber. Like everybody wanted it, right? It was like the thing that I remember I have younger brothers and the next youngest, we each had plastic lightsabers and we would chase each other around in the front yard, swinging at each other. And I have a scar on my nose from defeating him in battle and then him throwing a chunk of a door siding at me because he was not happy about that. So yeah. I have a Star Wars story.
Oh yeah. Just before you do that, I just wanted to, my last notes would be, I kind of wish I did more what Sean did and kind of collected them because I remember having all these figurines and toys from Star Wars. And I remember I had the Luke Skywalker in the orange jumpsuit and sticking his head in the dirt and pushing it and breaking his head off. That's how I play with my toys. I got full value out of destroying them. But I wish I could go back and have that in the box, never opened.
I have two of each, one to play with and one, at the time they were
Sean's just
put you through college. Now. No, but again, they're they'll put you through college. I'm let me tell you right now, they're going to. They didn't appreciate that much. That's all.
I want to, at some point we have to unpack why Jim was taking action figures and ripping their heads off. I feel like that explains a lot, Jim.
Yeah. That was young Jim. That was 6, 7 years old. Yeah. Well, I mean, all my toys were broken.
Sean, you took mine. I'm a big Iron Man fan. I really didn't know the character until Favreau and kind of put that out. And I was like, holy yes, this is amazing, right? It was kind of this is Marvel's answer to Batman for the DC, and it's so much better. I love Batman, I think it's great too, but the whole character of Iron Man, and I think especially with the way that it was portrayed as Tony Stark, and it was just perfect casting. So I don't know, can I pick this? I'm not going to pick the same one. I'll say, I enjoy a lot of the different things. The one I think that captured me most recently was probably Loki, the series on Disney for the Marvel series. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was fantastic, and alligator or crocodile Loki is awesome. So if you ever watched that, you know what that's all about. But I thought it was original and it was a good story. And I still have to watch season 2. But I'm with you. Iron Man is the bomb, as the kids say. I don't even have to say anymore.
The casting for him is amazing. Yeah. Sorry, Jim.
No, I'm going to make a suggestion because I'm sure most of our listeners like these genres as well. And if you're listening and you're just shouting your answer at your iPhone or however you're listening, go out to LinkedIn where we post this comment or when Jeff posts this episode and just drop in what your favorite was. We'd love to hear it.
Yeah, it'll be interesting. A lot of out of context, like, hey, this episode's available. And all of a sudden it's just a bunch of TVs, movie shows, things like that. I think that'd be really funny. All right. I think that's a good spot to leave it. We'll go ahead and wrap things up. Atul, Sean, thank you guys for spending the time with us. I think this was such a dense topic. It took me a little bit to get my head around it. So I feel like this is an area where it's kind of like just beginning. So definitely appreciate the work that you guys are doing as part of the working group, right? To get this out. This is how things start, right? It starts at that level. And then all of a sudden, next thing you know, it's like SAML, OpenID Connect, right? These things that everybody knows about and understands. So I appreciate you guys being part of the conversation and kind of helping start to demystify how this works. We'll have links in our show notes. If you want to connect with Sean or Atul on LinkedIn, you can definitely check out the show notes there. We'll have a link to Signal, SGNL.ai, so you can learn more about what Atul and his company does. We'll have a link to the blog that Atul wrote around this, Rethinking Federated Identity with the Continuous Access Evaluation Protocol, which is now Profile. It's my understanding, what I got from this conversation. And yeah, you can always connect with Jim and I on LinkedIn. We're on the web, idacpodcast.com. We're on Twitter or X or whatever it is now, at IDAC Podcast. Mastodon at IDAC Podcast at infosec.exchange. And yeah, connect with us on LinkedIn as well. Don't forget to leave us a voicemail, win a copy of the book that Phil Winley wrote, and hear your voice on air February 5th. So anything else, Jim, that I forget, or are we ready to go?
No, you rocked it, man. And, you did really well considering that, again, you have the cold or flu or RSV, or dare I say, you've got the
no, I tested negative.
I'm not sure.
I'm good on that. I think it was just allergies or some sort of...
It's just allergies.
Sinus.
Don't worry, I sneezed right on you, but don't worry, it's just
a flesh wound. Don't worry about it. The show must go on. See, this is what I do because I love it. All right, that's enough. Thanks, everyone, for listening, and we'll talk with everyone in the next one.
You've been listening to Identity at the Center. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review, and we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit the website at identityatthecenter.com and find us on Twitter at IDAC Podcast. See you next time on Identity at the Center.